The violence turns bloody in downtown Cairo as pro-Mubarak supporters take on the demonstrators in Tahrir Square. But why did the military hold back and watch the two sides battle it out? And is the army divided over its loyalty to the president and its promise not to harm the protesters? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Dramatic scenes in Tahrir Square as pro-Mubarak supporters clash with opposition demonstrators. In the ensuing carnage, several people were killed and hundreds injured. The military has come under rising criticism for standing on the sidelines and watching the bloodshed unfold. So what is the army's role in this crisis, and how long can they stand aside and watch Egypt descend into chaos? Alan Fisher reports now on the latest developments.
The crowds are growing again. Surrounded by pro-Mubarak supporters, the army has moved in to keep both sides apart. Strange faces are treated with suspicion. Fear grips those moving around. There have been more clashes, but nothing as serious as Wednesday. These men are pro-Mubarak supporters, caught and placed in a makeshift prison in the square. These are the ones behind all of this, says the man.
This is not just a revolt to topple a regime. Yeah. This is a revolt for our dignity. We need justice. We need to punish those who committed atrocities and crimes against humanity in this square.
Many have been injured here. Doctors have done what they can to patch them up. Others have arrived ready for battle.
This helmet is something I bought from home, from a neighbour.
The army now has a much larger presence on the streets. Its arrival was cheered by the anti-Mubarak camp. Soldiers have begun to push the pro-president supporters further and further away from the square. But there are those who are still unconvinced it will act to help.
The military's position is very strange. They saw people being hit just a few steps away from them, and they did not move or do anything. In any country in the world, the military is expected to ensure security and peace, but the Egyptian military did not.
The army may now be in position, but it hasn't lifted the fear that there may be more violence here, more property damaged, more people injured or killed. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, John Sfakianakis, a political analyst specialising in the Egyptian economy and the role of the military. In Washington, D.C., Richard White, Senior Fellow and Director for the Centre for Political and Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. And on the phone from Cairo, military academic and strategist, retired Egyptian Army General Gamal Mazloum. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. General Gamal Mazloum, let me start with you, if I may, in the Egyptian capital. Why didn't the army step in to stop those bloody clashes we saw on Wednesday?
You know, what I expected of my idea is that the number of soldiers may be not sufficient to keep peace in this area, and he was suddenly astonished for those people who come quickly from an area is very, very close. He didn't expect that they can come, and they come very quickly. And what happened we have seen yesterday. The fact is that I think today is more better. I think they have got more soldiers to the Medan Tahrir and try to make a big separation from both sides in order that something like that don't happen today. And I think it is make them more ready to much troubles maybe happen later on. But I think that the army don't want to be to any side of these two parts who is in supporters or opposition to the situation now.
General Mazloum, stay with us, won't you? We'll come back to you in a few minutes. John Sfakianakis in Riyadh. Egypt's military is, of course, one of the most respected institutions in the country, the experts tell us. Why is the army not stepping in to stop these violent and bloody scenes that we saw on Wednesday in Tahrir Square? What's your assessment of what's going on?
The army is the protector of the state in Egypt, and the position they're taking is that of a neutral observer. Certainly, they're a part of, let's say, the extended system, the political system in Egypt, but at the moment they're not willing to take sides. They will take sides when they think this is necessary, and at the same time, it is clear that they are not going to go against the people because they will lose their legitimacy. In Egypt, society respects the institution of the army, of the military, and that is going to tarnish their reputation if they start taking sides. Also, you have to remember that they do serve a purpose, that they are also part of the system of ruling Egypt, and they are an arm of the Mubarak regime, but at the same time there is a fine line that divides the military as part of the regime and the military as part of the institutions of the state.
Richard White's in Washington. Let's bring you in here. I mean, do you agree with that? Is the army part of the ruling elite, perhaps? I mean, how do you see the role of the military in this standoff? I mean, how much can they tip the balance of power away from or towards the government?
I think in the short term they would have a major impact. They could have a coup and depose Mubarak. They could go out in the street and repress the protesters on one side or another. And so in a short term, they can have a major impact. The problem would arise that over time, we found that militaries are not really good rulers of countries. The economies are much more complex than they were maybe 50 years ago when coups were common. And the military, it eventually loses power and has to go back to the barracks. So they could have a very important role in the short term in transitioning to a post-Mubarak government. But longer term, they would presumably want to withdraw from the political scene as rapidly as possible.
Let's bring in back General Gamal Masloum on the phone from the Egyptian capital. General Gamal, the new Prime Minister, Ahmed Shafiq, says the violence of Wednesday will not be repeated. Does this mean then that he's saying that they will deploy the army? I mean, what are your colleagues in the army telling you?
You know, I think he speaks frankly. I think that maybe some of the party of Mubarak, some of them may be thinking that they are still in strength and they can do what they wanted to do. But now this is the first Prime Minister to know that maybe something outside of the ministries would like to disturb what happened in Egypt, and that is a good lesson for him to take care for all things inside the country, to take care of them, and not something like that happen again. But I have full confidence that he is speaking truth, and maybe that part of the parties try to reinforce themselves again and try to take rule in the situation what happened now in Cairo.
General Gamal, let me just ask you, you were sitting watching all this happen in Tahrir Square. Who do you think planned the violence? Who do you think was behind it? I mean, was it organized at a higher level?
You know what I would like to tell you, frankly, there is some things happens, or some other countries trying to play in our country. What I would like to do is that who forced prisoners to go out. Now we find today that there is some people from Hezbollah was in the prison. Now they are in Beirut. Some people from Gaza Strip was in the prison, and after 5 or 4 hours exactly from the opening prison, they reach to Gaza. How these things happen? It means that there is something, or people are playing in our country, trying to make the security or discipline is not good in Cairo. That's frankly what happened. Can you imagine that people from Hezbollah have escaped and now they are in Beirut after a few hours? How they escaped from prison and where they walking in our country and how they go outside borders?
That's an interesting point. Let me put that to John Sfakianakis. John, you've been watching this from a distance there in Riyadh. I mean, there are reports that the pro-government supporters were perhaps paid to cause the violence we saw on Wednesday in Tahrir Square. I mean, some reports that police ID cards were even found on some of them. Who do you think was behind it? Were there outside forces, as General Masloum is suggesting?
I think that the evidence so far indicates that these are within the wider apparatus of the Egyptian security forces. Since we have a paralysis of the internal security forces, more or less, since they have disappeared from the streets, and that has instigated havoc. Of course, the private militias that were created, I would say that the forces that we have seen are domestic, not external. And I'm very surprised indeed that this has become the case, because the security forces have completely been paralyzed. This is a 1.4 million unit that supposedly has been there to protect in many ways the regime, but they have not been able to do much protection. And so I would say that these are part of the regime rather than external forces. And this is the dilemma for the military. What is the military going to do? Are they going to shoot against the security forces or some of these people, or are they going to take sides and start shooting at people? Are they going to shoot against towards the National Democratic Party members, or let's say the security forces that have turned their official clothes and they have gone into civilian clothes? Or are they going to shoot towards the demonstrators, the young people?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very difficult...
So they are in a dilemma here, the military.
Yes, of course. I mean, let's put that point to Richard White. I mean, it is a very difficult dilemma for the military, but they have been criticised nonetheless for standing by and watch as both sides clashed on Wednesday. Why do you think it's becoming so difficult to predict the role of the armed forces, or what role they'll play in either suppressing the disturbances or easing out the president from power?
Just as a point of information, about an hour ago, according to the newswires, they did intervene recently to stop the violence. But you're right, yesterday they let it go. The problem is the loyalty to the officer corps. It's not to Mubarak. It's almost not to the Egyptian state. It's really to the officer corps itself. And they will try and avoid anything that will divide the military internally. So siding with one side decisively, is particularly when I suspect the officer corps itself is divided, would cause a lot of damage to the internal structure, lead to a lot of corporate losses. So they would try and, if they're going to serve a role, they would want to do something that would achieve a consensus. So they would probably help, it would help them if there was some other actor like the United States or some other group that would help mediate a solution in which they would feel comfortable participating. They would not want to risk internal divisions by acting decisively on their own.
Well, let's put that very point about possible splits to General Gamal Masloum on the phone from Cairo. General Masloum, where is the loyalty in the Egyptian army? I mean, is it to the people that we're seeing clashing in the square, or is it to the president and the ruling elite?
No, I think they might get an order from the president, especially to the Minister of Defense, to do something like that. But I think it will be at the last, the edge of the solution to do something like that. Because I told you that the army is, he don't take care of who is supporters or is his opposition, in order that to be the idea about the army, that the army is the army of the people, the army of Egypt, is not the army of one side to the other side. That is the main thing to the situation now in Egypt.
John Sfakianakis in Riyadh, it was a historic moment. It was, I mean, we saw those dramatic pictures coming from Tahrir Square. And how much of a pivotal moment was the violence that we saw? I mean, is that likely to very swiftly shift the balance of power between the government and the anti-government forces? Because the situation is extremely fluid and it's very, very unpredictable, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. We haven't seen such unrest happening in Egypt for a very long time. Of course, there were indications before in the recent past in 2008 and of course in 2005, but not to this degree, to this magnitude. So this is all very new for everybody, and especially for the security forces, and of course for the military, which is trained to fight wars, not to be out in the streets trying to put away demonstrators. So this is very unique for all the countries in the region, and especially for a country such as Egypt. And definitely this is kind of trying to put together a new way of thinking about the role of the military in society, and of course politics in general.
John Weitz, you're there in Washington, D.C. We know the U.S., of course, is a big ally of Egypt. Egypt, of course, is a big ally of the U.S. But what's your assessment of the Egyptian military? How well trained are they, and what's their morale like from where you're sitting?
They have, as far as, well, that's a bit of a problem, because the people who come to Washington on the exchanges are probably the best of the best. So the people we've met are certainly on the caliber of any officer you'd have in the U.S. military. But in terms of the rank and file, that's, I think, another problem of this internal division. If the officer corps were to order their troops to fire on the demonstrators, they would risk that not happening, and then the corporate structure itself would be in danger. So they would probably want to avoid that. So even if they're normally trained to obey orders, there would have been taught, particularly if they came to U.S. school, about illegal orders, and shooting on unarmed protesters would probably be considered an illegal order in the U.S. military, and so they were so taught.
General Gamal Masloum in Cairo, let me put that to you. I mean, would Egyptian soldiers obey orders if the president said they needed to fire on unarmed Egyptian protesters?
No, I think they have a mission. The main mission to the army in situation like that is to guard the main buildings, ministers, for example, factories, institutions of the country. That is just to keep security about it. Security in roads, security in areas, but they are not training to go to the demonstrators or to do something like that. That is the thing. The mission is to the interior security soldiers or troops. For this, I think they are trying to do their best in order that to keep security and discipline in Cairo and the other areas. That is the main thing. But I think maybe when it will be urgent, maybe the president gives him some orders to, or try to make some shoots to make people appear or to go up far from the areas in order that to keep security of the country as a whole.
John Sfakianakis in Riyadh, let's see if we can see a way forward out of this. We know that President Mubarak has made 3 key appointments over the last few days: the new vice president, the new prime minister and the new interior minister. All, of course, have extensive military and security backgrounds. What's this telling us about the options open to Mubarak, and how is he trying to secure his legacy if he goes?
Well, the legacy is 30 years, and one has to examine it in the different phases that in itself has created. But I would say that the indications here are clear that the military will take the primary role. It will have a say in most of the things that unfold in the political landscape of Egypt. And these 2 individuals, Omar Suleiman and Ahmed Shafiq, the vice president and the prime minister, will be important personalities when it comes to looking at the role of the army and also the legitimacy of the new government. So I would say that the signals are very clear that the army is going to be placated and included in the political process of Egypt.
Richard Weitz, what's the view from Washington? I mean, is it now just a matter of time before the regime collapses, whether or not the army turns on the government or not?
That's, well, the word collapse is something I don't think they anticipate. I think the Washington, i.e. the White House, about 5-minute walk from here, I think what they would like to see is not a collapse of the regime in the sense of a social revolution, but the president to resign and immediately, not to wait till the next election, and transfer power to some other group who would negotiate with the opposition, and then we go through the standard process of transitioning to free and fair elections in which new government's elected. They're worried that the longer President Mubarak tries to hang on, the more radical people will become, and we saw an indication of that yesterday. And in that case, people will start joining extremist movements, and I think that's the worry, that they're not sure about the Muslim Brotherhood. There's mixed evidence on how radical it is, what its views are towards the United States. But I don't think they want to risk another Iran, so they would like to constrain any influence it would have. But I suspect that as the struggle goes on, as it becomes protracted, more people will be looking for extremist groups to try and help end the situation.
General Gamal Mazloum, do you think President Mubarak has perhaps bought some time for himself by appointing Suleiman and other senior officers to the government? Because it very much looks like a military government in civilian clothing, doesn't it?
No, I don't say something like that. The fact is that when he get Omar Suleiman, I know that he is a military man and I worked with him, but the situation to Egypt now and the situation exactly of Egypt as a whole is very important for strategic, as we can say, problems, and the point of Egypt is very important to all over the world. It means they need something like that. But you know, if you take a look to all the big people or big posts in Egypt, you cannot find anyone, because now in the area or in Egypt exactly, he is a good man and he was dealing with much problems to the area, like Palestinian problem and Sudanese problem and the other countries. He has a good experience about the political problems for Egypt and all over the area, and think he is not a military ministry. And concerning the Prime Minister, Dr. Ahmed Shafi, I think if you take a look to all ministers which have been go away for the last one, you can get that he was a very good. He was a good man and he was disciplined, and Egypt need in the next time now to the next period people which is no discipline good, and what they say they do.
Okay, let's just bring him back, John Sfakianakis in Riyadh. John Sfakianakis, if Mubarak does leave the political scene, I mean, what happens next? Does the army step in to take control for a few months before handing over to perhaps a sort of transitional government before elections, say in September? What happens?
Well, certainly there is a vice president that will become president. That's one option. And the other option will be that people will continue to demonstrate, and they will not necessarily like for Omar Suleiman to take over. That's another scenario. The third scenario is that we go into a transition government whereby both of these people, the president, the vice president becomes president, and Ahmed Shafiq continues as prime minister. And then we go into transition government, and at some point they announce elections in the near future, be it September or a bit thereafter. And then we'll have to wait and see. But of course, both of these people are people from the army, and they are respected people from the army. So the army will be happy with these people. But then we have to see the contenders and the opposition forces that will come to the fore.
Let's get a final thought in from Richard Weiss. I mean, how are you assessing the wider regional security implications? I mean, Egypt is a big ally of the US, and they have a peace treaty with Israel. How critical are the next few days as events unfold?
Assessment not good from the U.S. perspective, and very critical. As I said, the longer this goes on, the more riskier that it's going to polarize, and then some anti-American group will come to power. In a way, the military is probably the closest ally in the United States, and I think they might try and influence the military a little indirectly. Perhaps have some members of Congress say, well, we'll cut off funding if the military doesn't intervenes on the side of Mubarak or something like that. not a direct White House comment, but something a little more, communicate the message, but a little more indirectly.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks to our guests in Riyadh, John Sfakianakis, in Washington, D.C., Richard White, and on the phone from Cairo, General Gamal Mazloum. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.